So the current situation with the American election, I think, is a really interesting one. I think it's one that was always on the horizon, but maybe none of us really expected to actually happen. That the Democrats would do something blatantly fraudulent and tamper with the ballots. And now Trump is stuck in the situation where he has to challenge it, because if he steps down, then he loses, obviously, but also that nothing gets changed. But I also think it's a great opportunity for Canadian nationalists, because now we can really focus on emphasizing the difference in our electoral system in contrast to the American electoral system, and how some of the problems that exist now in America can be solved differently in Canada. I think this is a good way to reach out to normies. I think, like, in the last few days, I've been talking to some normies, and you can really emphasize the strength of having a crown and a weak monarchical presence, but we can also argue now for a stronger one. So, for example, like, America is in a deadlock, and the courts will have to decide what's going on, but the courts, of course, are not neutral, right? The Democrats have already been talking about this for a while with Bennett's appointment. But also, there is no neutral mechanism in the States, whereas in Canada we have ultimately the Crown, that the Governor General can be the arbiter of elections, and it has happened in the past. Now, granted, it's never happened with fraud on this scale, but if Canadians ended up in a situation like this, we do have that mechanism. And I think now we can really argue that the Americanization of our country and in the broader world does open us to American problems. I think this is something that you can really touch base with normies on, that you have, the general Canadian ethos of not being American and, openly hating America. And I think, like, as reactionaries, we have to grab onto that sentiment and turn it towards a more authentic, traditional way of being conservative. That was very much what old Trudeau was good at doing, is he took the anti-Canadian sentiment at his time, which was very much a pro-British identity, an identity of being a part of something greater like the British Empire, and an identity of keeping those useful English institutions and having a more European sense of being than an American one. And he kept that anti-American sentiment that was part of that identity, but he was able to turn it around, instead of being something conservative and looking deeper into tradition and history, to being something progressive. That now, being Canadian is having an identity where you're more liberal than Americans, right? And that's part of the reason why Trump is so hated here, is because he is the quintessential American, and we have to identify ourselves against him. But I think more broadly, we can now focus on, not so much digging in and defending Trump on everything he does here, but just pointing out the weaknesses in the American system and the weaknesses of a pure democratic system, right? That it's not that Canada is much better than the States or any better, but that we need to focus on those things which are different and which are outside of the liberal paradigm. And I would argue that the Crown is somewhat like that. That, of course, now the Governor Generals are appointed and by the Prime Ministers, and, I'm not banking on our current Governor General of being like some super conservative or anything, but that we do have an opportunity to kind of revive some of that older Canadian identity, to juxtapose it with the American identity, and also to show that the direction Canada's heading in is a more American direction than it would be heading in had a lot of the reforms under Pierre Elliott Trudeau not happened. And this is kind of my ramblings, but I think we have an opportunity here that the whole world's looking at America and seeing that something's wrong. And I think rather than, picking a side and digging in on that side, as Canadians, I think we need to place our focus more on pointing out the flaws in the American system, because the American system is really the global homo system at the end of the day. That, right, like an Americanized world is the global homo world, right? That these big corporations, for the most part, are American corporations. And I think we can harness a lot of the Canadian animosity towards America now and turn it towards global homo. Just try to show normie Canadians that all of these world government projects, so to speak, are American in origin, are American ethos, are American in the way they operate, and they're going to have those American problems that America is having now. Just kind of, yeah, a lot of like loose thoughts thrown out there, but that's my 2 cents on the whole situation. Have a good day.